Here comes an 8-wheeler. Hopefully it's going to fit down the lane. Oh, bloody hell. Jesus. It's quite tight. Item number 700 on the list of things that I never thought I'd do at work.
The thing is, maybe you drive down here and then reverse in. I don't know what you think's easier, but is that possible? Yeah? Okay.
Guide a massive truck down a tiny Cornish lane. Why am I doing this? That'll soon become clear, but we're going to have to rewind. I'm Tom Praviti, and this is Grounded, a climate startup journey. In this episode, I can promise you a fair chunk of climate, a big dose of startup, and a whole lot of journey. And due to that last bit, this episode has some bad language. Consider yourself warned. Now, have you got wood? Because if so, I'm in the market. I'd been in Cornwall a few weeks, enjoying or enduring an especially rainy British summer, as if I needed a reminder of our increasingly unpredictable climate. So now that my site was set up, I was eager to start making biochar and saving the world. But before I could, I'd need my machine and some wood to put in it. And unfortunately, on the first of those, things were taking a little longer than planned. Bit of an update, the pyrolysis machine has been delayed. I hoped it would arrive 2 weeks ago, but there have been a bunch of complications which have meant that it's just taken longer to get it here. But it is almost here, he said, hopefully. These delays were a potential problem. I'd promised Bennett's Associates, my carbon credit buyers, that I'd be delivering on the first 25 tonnes of carbon removal by the end of the year. And that would mean several months of pretty solid biochar making between now and Christmas. But I was keeping upbeat. I knew that I had a few precious weeks to focus on getting my feedstock sorted and getting the nuts and bolts of my business a little more secure before the hard work began. And staying focused at the farm shouldn't be too difficult. I mean, like, the pubs close at 11. There's not many restaurants around where I am. You have to kind of get in a car to go anywhere. So you're kind of left to your own devices, really. So other than the odd swim in the river, I was in work mode. After all, getting the machine on site was just one of my challenges. Once the final payment was made on the machine, and I'd covered some other equipment purchases, I estimated that I'd be about £60,000 deep when it came to CapEx, or capital expenditure. That's everything I needed on the ground before I made a single piece of biochar. And the way that things were looking, my operating costs for the pilot were likely to be similar, about another £60,000 over the next few months. These numbers did include a bit of contingency or sort of wiggle room, but listeners, I hope it won't be too much of a spoiler to say that yes, I would be needing that wiggle room. It was hard not to hear my dad's words ringing in my ears.
If none of those come through, then you're fucked.
But as I waited for the machine, those months of grant applications seemed to be paying off. Good news, we won a grant from the Prince's Trust, which is really helpful, £5,000 to put towards the project. So that's sort of, I guess, just to me, just sort of, evidence that we're doing something good. If the Prince's Trust has supported us now, then there's going to be a few more eyes on it. Then the core Future Leaders Network, who'd kindly supported season 1 of this podcast, chipped in to fund a second. Not only did that mean that you lucky things would get to hear me drone on for another 5 episodes, it also gave me an excuse to keep the mic rolling, as yet more developments came in. And in the other news, I had a call with Al yesterday, and we've won the RD&I grant.
Oh, that's marvellous. Good, well done.
I had an assurance of £50,000 from the Good Growth Fund, an investment strategy for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, aiming to foster green and inclusive growth by supporting innovative businesses, like ours. Finally, NERF, the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, awarded us a grant as part of their mission to explore potential revenue opportunities for the agricultural sector. This meant more cash and more work. I'd be collaborating with a team from Finance Earth, and we'd be researching what a viable UK biochar business could look like. Not only would I have another 25k of the total 100k grant to put directly towards my pilot, but I'd also be able to spend some time and resource with the Finance Earth team thinking about the future of this business and businesses like it. Because if it wasn't already clear, my current business model was somewhat reliant on the buy-in and goodwill of grant makers, and I knew that couldn't continue forever. But for now, I cannot stress enough, this was all great news. Sure, it came with caveats and new deliverables, and reporting to grant makers was now going to be a big part of the next few months, but it also opened up new opportunities, and crucially meant that this was all definitely going to happen, without me having to start that OnlyFans. Sorry. With funding secured, I realised that my challenge now, like many other startups or scale-up businesses will know, would be cash flow. For some of these grants, you don't just get a check in the mail when you get accepted. You have to provide evidence before being paid. One of the grants actually requires that I spend money first in order to claim some back. And on top of all this, I have to manage my VAT, value added tax for those non-UK listeners. Essentially, claiming back the tax on purchases that my business has made. And because my budget figures and the grants that I've won assume that I'm getting this VAT back, I'll be nearly constantly out of pocket for whatever VAT I've recently spent. It would all be one big balancing act and a week-to-week challenge to keep my account in the black. So, what's this all got to do with wood? Well, every day that I didn't have enough wood on the farm to make biochar was a day that I wouldn't be producing, and every day that I wasn't producing would be another day that the whole project was pushed back, with impacts on my grant claims, my VAT returns, and so on. I was starting a game of 3D chess on steroids, and I was quickly realising that I would need to be thinking 100 steps ahead. We're also going to figure out how we can sort of build out a supply chain of feedstock, which is kind of integral to this conversation that we're having now. So this is just like a question that I threw out there, but basically tree surgery teams that have work within a certain radius of our farm, let's say, would deliver or have the opportunity to deliver waste wood to our project, to our on-farm site where Restored is based. This is a very crudely drawn little circle around where we are. Again, I'm not really sure exactly how much work Dan, your teams do within that sort of area, but that's sort of what we had in mind.
We do work in those areas. It's difficult to say at the moment with the forward program, but there will be timber available in those areas, I'm sure.
I'm talking to some of the team at Cormac, a Cornwall council company responsible, among other things, for the maintenance of over 4,500 miles of Cornish roads and other infrastructure. But as well as everything that you would expect, from pothole filling to bridge maintenance, they look after a lot of trees. And I'm speaking with them because I want their wood. The good news, they've got it, and they've got it nearby. But I'm realising that when it comes to making biochar in the way that I'm doing it, not all wood is created equal.
Do you have any kind of logic or criteria, as in, like, for example, the size of wood? Do you want big pieces in some areas and smaller bits in other bits, all within reason, or are you happy to just sort of have it dropped into one of those cubby holes on whatever date?
Well, conveniently, I've been thinking about that. So we can definitely take on any timber that's either too big to go in a wood chipper, but small enough that it can be cut and processed with like a 16 or an 18-inch chainsaw. And then wood chip we can't receive at the moment, just based on the machine that we've got and the setup that we have. So this is sort of like optimum. This sort of stuff. You see, I was learning that there were broadly 3 qualities I had to think about when it came to feedstock, and I'd be wrestling with all of them as I sorted my supply. The first 2 were clear from this chat with Cormac. 1, the feedstock itself, and how suitable was it for making biochar. I'd obviously already decided to go for woody biomass, which would be a lot simpler than some of the wetter alternatives. But beyond this, I needed to bear in mind the type of wood that my machine would be able to handle. In short, nothing so big that it wouldn't adequately char all the way through or need massive amounts of processing to get it down to size, and not too small, like wood chip, which would all clump together and create the same problem. 2. The logistics of my supply chain. I needed to make sure that I had access to feedstock nearby, that I had enough of it, and that the whole operation would be cost effective. I didn't want to transport tons of wood around the country or pay for what I could get for free. So we're talking about local waste wood. I had some of that already on the farm itself, but I need a lot more. And that's why I was talking with Cormac. But the third consideration was a lot more complex. Because later on, when it came to doing my life cycle assessment and demonstrating the climate value of my project, I would need to consider what would have happened to my wood if I hadn't turned it into biochar. That isn't just a tongue twister, it's a pretty major element to the project's success. For instance, when I first heard about biochar several years ago, one of my first questions was, why is this better than composting? Composting is great, we're all encouraged to do it. Yes, but...
I mean, with composting, how much carbon would be actually stored in the compost itself? It's fairly minimal. Plus, you have other issues. You might have methane emissions coming off compost, for example.
That's Biana, an old colleague of mine who I spoke to earlier in the summer. Since our recording, she's joined B0 Carbon, an independent carbon ratings agency which assesses risks associated with carbon projects of all types. When I started getting into the weeds of this stuff, I wanted some context, and she was an obvious person to speak to. Essentially, composting is fine for your kitchen or garden waste, and there are loads of benefits to it for crops and for soil health, but it's not always great at keeping its carbon locked up over longer timeframes. And depending on the composting process itself, it can also release other gases that you just don't want. From a greenhouse gas perspective, making biochar out of my feedstock is likely going to be better than leaving it to compost. But a lot of waste biomass in a municipal or industrial context has other destinations and other uses, and these counterfactuals can be hard to measure.
Like bioenergy, so if they're used for wood chips or wood pellets instead, that is a form of clean energy, and then it kind of depends on what the market is. It kind of depends on the context.
In other words, some of the wood that I might be using for biochar could, in theory, be a candidate for bioenergy generation. And if it was, then me turning it into biochar could displace some of that bioenergy potential. One way to think of all this is to look at my first source of feedstock, and the most obvious one, the dead wood on Bekena Farm itself.
You said some of it will come from your own farm. And my question was what is that used for today? Just left on the ground, or are you drying it a bit to heat up the
so there's some which is just left in the wood, and then there'll be larger bits that are taken on site and used maybe in a couple of years' time as firewood.
Yeah.
Though we've got a lot at the moment. So it's kind of just left in wood storage until a point in time when that might be used for that.
And do you have any ideas about if you can use that to make biochar, how you're going to heat those buildings that you would heat to this firewood?
We would most likely use heating from the grid.
If I was using wood that I'd otherwise be burning to heat the farmhouse where I was living, I'd need to consider what impact this would have on my own energy bills. Because although burning wood for fuel isn't a completely clean process, it is at least renewable, so it isn't pulling carbon from deep underground into the short carbon cycle. Whereas electricity from the grid was likely to be a mix of renewable and fossil sources. When it came to the other wood that I was sourcing, this might be even more complicated.
From leakage perspective, if you had to pay for it, say you're buying wood chips that are also otherwise used for wood chip boilers, then you have to think, okay, I'm actually taking something off the market that has a market value and market view, and for whatever is going to replace that might come with some emissions. So you're indirectly causing emissions from where else. That's called the leakage.
Okay, this can feel super abstract and somewhat pedantic, I know. But for a climate business, it's imperative to both understand and optimize your climate impact. This meant lots of in-depth conversations with potential suppliers, like Cormac, to understand how I would fit in with their overall operations. So yeah, there were quite a few criteria that my wood needed to meet in order to pass muster, and I needed a lot of it. In my regular catch-up with Adam and Chintan, my machine partners from Capture, I was keen to underline the scale of my wood problem.
So we're going to need 100 to 200 tons of wood. Mm-hmm. 200 tons of wood is the equivalent of 1 blue whale or 40 elephants. So
I was gonna say, what's that volume in like, how does it look?
That's what it looks like.
If only this podcast had visuals.
I love the fact you've done that. Very good. Okay.
So we need 40 elephants worth of wood, potentially up to 40 elephants worth of wood, which is quite scary.
Yeah, even from a storage capacity point of view, because like your barns aren't that big.
Chintan was right. The logistics of handling and storing this much wood on site weren't going to be simple.
And then this is where we're going to be storing, where we'll take deliveries. So there's enough space here for 8-wheelers and bigger trucks to come down and then drop off wood. It's pretty.
I arranged for Stuart Wright, the head of environmental sustainability at Cormac's parent company Corserve, to visit the farm and see how feasible this operation would be. I'd now been speaking with several local organisations who might have waste wood for me, and Cormac seemed like they could be a big part of my supply. But in order to make this work, I needed to make the delivery process as seamless as possible. The organisation has waste wood coming from many different sites, and it would be delivered by different tree surgery teams at different times and potentially on large trucks.
So this is the sort of area we were thinking could be a good location for some of the tree surgeon teams that are coming in. They can drive in here, literally kind of dump wood in here and then drive back out again. That was sort of our plan. So we've cleared this Dutch barn, made it sort of ready. I mean, you can see it's pretty old, but currently it's only going to be needed for wood storage, so it doesn't need to be anything perfect.
One of the things I noticed coming in, access, it's okay. So the vehicles that a lot of our teams use, they're 3.5 ton Iveco tipping trucks. They're not lorries or anything, but they're a bit bigger than pickup size. And I think, my car was brushing against the vegetation. So I think in the autumn it might be worth just clearing it so bigger vehicles can get through a bit easier. But I'd imagine tractors get through all the time, so it must be fine. But
yeah, no, the tractors do get through. A lot of it is just like sort of vegetation that's overgrown. But we're going to do a cut in. We're going to do a cut later in this month. Actually, I think.
You might also then here you might want a sign to say to stop them coming right around to
deliveries
the house.
here. That's a good point actually. That is a very good point.
But, stuff you don't always think about. Making sure multi-ton wood deliveries come to your biochar site rather than your front door. Yeah. It wasn't exactly a purpose-built setup, but it seemed like, with a little bit of adaptation, that this should work. I now just needed to make it happen. My search for wood was going strong. I had Cormac on board and also had an agreement with nearby Plymouth City Council for some of theirs. All being well, deliveries should start before the machine arrived, and within a couple of weeks, I could be turning local waste into biochar. So, with wood agreements in place, I headed back to London for a few meetings and to celebrate another year around the sun.
I'm very impressed. Lizzie and I are particularly pleased with the fact that Thomas has managed to pass his cross-cutting chainsaw course. I've spoken to the instructor and he said that it was touch and go. I'm sure it'll be tremendously successful. You've made us proud, Thomas, and we're looking forward to the next part of the project, which will be bloody hard work. Yeah, we wish you every success with the second half of the project, and happy birthday.
If you ever need a morale boost, I can highly recommend recording your family saying nice things about you. Just try not to leave the mic lying around while you have siblings in the room.
Hello, Thomas. We're very proud of you. Thomas is getting further with his carbon removal. He's got the cement running. The machine's about to arrive. He's about to get cracking. It's exciting news. Carbon is going to be removed. Can't wait.
Still, while I was buoyed with my family's faith, in reality, I was still overwhelmed by everything that needed to happen and the tight timeline that I was working towards. To complicate matters, the paperwork that would confirm the VAT number I'd just registered for had been sent to the farm in Cornwall while I was in London, and I needed this number to make my first VAT claim and avoid an imminent cash flow cliff edge. That meant dealing with the purgatory of His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the tax guys.
Welcome to HM Revenue and Customs. If you're calling about the Chancellor's announcement on private schools, those not currently registered for VAT should not apply to HMRC to register at this time.
Oh, come on.
Okay, it wasn't purgatory. I was in hell.
To direct your call to the right place, I'd like to know why you're calling today. So tell me, in a few words, what's the reason for your call?
VAT number.
About a VAT number, is that right?
Yes.
Do you want to register for a new VAT number?
No.
And are you looking to check the VAT number of a business?
Yes.
Do you have the number?
No. That's why I'm calling.
Sorry. Do you have the number you want to verify?
No.
If you're looking to verify an EU VAT number, you can do this on the Europa website.
No. I
If you
don't
would
want.
still like to speak to one of our advisors, please hold on a moment and I'll transfer you. We routinely record calls for quality, training and security purposes.
Little did they know, so do I. A few days later, it was back to Cornwall and back to the farm. It was get wood time. Even with the few tons that I had from the farm itself, I was quickly realising that a chainsaw alone wouldn't be able to cut it. I mean, it would literally be able to cut it, but getting larger pieces to the right size would be incredibly labour intensive. So I made another investment, a heavy-duty log splitter, and I enlisted some help in the form of my grandpa to get some wood prepped for pyrolysis.
Right.
Is it very noisy?
It is quite noisy.
Right.
But you've got
Put
the
the
earmuffs.
helmets on. Yeah.
Looks good?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to get, you stand here. I'm going to turn it on.
And Grandpa wasn't the only assistant that I had. My friend Max had come down from London to help me take delivery of the first wood from Plymouth Council. So while he manned the fort, I popped over to the depot a few miles away and oversaw the wood being loaded onto the truck.
How much ton do you reckon is in here at the moment? Only 4 to 5. So he's going to pack it down more and try and get as much as he can. Okay. I'll move around.
Turns out, wood's pretty bulky. We were trying to get 6 tons onto this first truck. There was no space spare.
When we get there, it's so you drive through. Basically, there's a couple of ways you can come in. We'll drive through, take a left, and then then we reverse in, and then just dump it by this Dutch barn.
All right.
But I'll explain it when we get there.
There's some wood coming.
There's some wood. Fucking hell. Tell him. If we can tip it, see where my friend is just here. If you want to score. Ideally, we try and tip it as close to the left side as we can. But basically, this is where we're going to be eventually shifting it all to. So, if you could get it in there, that'd be amazing. But I know it's quite tight.
And here I am, back where I started this episode, trying to guide a massive truck along a narrow country lane.
We've got some wood now. Oh, God.
Jesus. It was only now it was here that the magnitude of this operation struck me. This was what 6 tons of wood looked like. Aha. And it wasn't just morning wood that we were dealing with. We had a second delivery coming that afternoon.
Oh, not gonna lie, I'm really thankfully not here. If this had all arrived and it was just me, I think I would have started crying. Well, like, look how much wood it is. This fuck ton of wood. And this is only 12 tons.
For those who measured their wooden elephants, that's about 2.5. And I'd be turning it all into biochar. There was just one element missing. I have a decision to make about the machine delivery. Basically, there's an opportunity to go and visit the manufacturer on the 8th or the 9th, which is next week.
Right.
And then from that point, well, basically watch it do a burn, and then basically give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and have it kind of put onto a trailer, onto a truck, and then shipped to us, basically, which should take 1 day, maybe a day and a half.
Right.
Or the other option is just literally not go visit it, just have them send it out. And then it arrives Tuesday, maybe Wednesday next week.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to lose a week, but it doesn't really matter because you could usefully use that week. You need to, get wood ready for the burn. There are other things you need to do with the site to get the electricity in. So I would be minded to go and see it. And if you're not happy with it, get them to make modifications. Because once it's on site, you're sort of screwed.
So I took my dad's advice and made the trip with Adam to see the machine at the fabrication site. It didn't take long to spot our machine. Stood alone in a courtyard, she looked magnificent. And she was soon up and running.
I know it might not even pick us up. It's so loud. I don't know. What? Oh, that's him. He's lowering the pressure. It's a lot of moving parts.
We did a whole run of the machine, loading the kiln, getting it up to temperature, monitoring the pressure and the heat, and I was struck by a couple of things. One, this is a very physically demanding process. And two, it's pretty smoky. It looks and feels dirtier than I expected.
I mean, I think I'm equal measures excited and also slightly terrified. It's just like serious shit. This is really, pardon my French.
On the journey home, I was still experiencing what can only be described as a complex mix of emotions. This was exciting, it's kind of thrilling, and I'd soon be doing it and actually making biochar on a farm in the UK. But there were also some very real challenges ahead. In particular, all that smoke was giving me some concerns. I knew we'd be monitoring our process and improving it, and that our life cycle assessment would ultimately confirm that we were having a positive climate impact. But I guess when I set out on this journey, I hadn't pictured smoke. Yes, it underlined the importance of getting the process as clean as possible, but it also reminded me that not all climate work is as pretty as we might like to imagine. Adam was immediately practical about what this all meant for our operation.
So for me, I think the biggest learning things specific to your projects are greenwood needs to deal with it.
Yeah.
So drying becomes very important.
Yeah, because that was properly smoky and that wood felt pretty dry.
Some of the stuff we have to take with a pinch of salt, like we're going to have to pioneer some stuff as well.
Some of the wood we already had on farm had been well seasoned and was pretty dry already. But a lot of the wood that we were now going to be receiving was fresh off the tree. And this was a hurdle that we would need to overcome. Not only to reduce the smoke, but to make the pyrolysis process as efficient as possible. Adam's pragmatic optimism was reassuring. But I guess I was still sort of coming to terms with it all.
I guess it's my first, like I popped my biochar
pyrolysis
cherry now, and it's quite terrifying. It's quite like a terrifying experience.
Because I think the gravity hits you that you are going to be the custodian of this.
Yeah.
That's very different to software.
It's my responsibility, that machine, for the next 12 months or whatever it is. I look after it, care for it, work it, use it as efficiently as I can, not abuse it. But that's like, it feels like quite a weight of responsibility. I guess it was a bit of a trial by fire today.
Literally.
Next time, are we finally about to start making biochar? I sure hope so. You've been listening to Grounded, a climate startup journey, a podcast from Restored. Thanks to everyone who chatted to me on this journey, whether recorded or not, and a shout out to the team behind the show, our producer and my creative partner in crime, Ben Weaver-Hinks, our marketing coordinator, Oluwaseun Sani, our graphic designer, Lyubov Pankiv, and Paula Science, Jack Turnham, and Lizzie Reed for all of their work on helping promote the podcast. And a special thanks to the Future Leaders Network for supporting this podcast. If I could ask you to do just 2 favours, please hit that follow button wherever you're listening and give us a rating because it really helps. And share this episode with a friend or a colleague who you think might like what we're doing. You can find us on restored.earth. That's restored without the second E, .earth.